A huge storm is coming to the United States over the next couple of days, and this is expected to bring a significant severe weather outbreak to a large chunk of the United States both Saturday and Sunday, where we could see several tornadoes, which a few could even be strong and long-tracked, damaging winds that could be numerous to even at times widespread, and also large hail. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about this storm that'll be impacting the United States and where the greatest risk for all of these modes of severe weather will be. We'll begin with what's happening across the country today, and for the time being, we've actually had some severe weather today. A couple of tornadoes have already occurred back over in Mississippi and Alabama. These are relatively brief, and I'm not expecting to go live today, but we're going to continue to monitor this closely. We've had an on and off tornado potential here throughout the day. It will eventually wind down as we go into the evening hours, and this tornado threat is actually the remnants from what we saw yesterday back over in areas like Texas and as well as Louisiana. But it is a weakening system. Very low chance of tornadoes today. Just make sure you're staying weather aware over there in Mississippi, Alabama, and western Florida. Now back over to the west of this particular storm system, we have another storm system that's going to be developing here over the Rocky Mountains over the next 24 hours. And by tomorrow morning, we will have a trough that's going to be located over in Oklahoma and Texas. And this is eventually expected to bring the potential for a 2-day severe weather event, which will begin tomorrow morning, and it will run all the way through Sunday evening as far east and north as areas like Kentucky and as well as Virginia. So this storm system tomorrow is really going to ramp up over the next 24 hours. This right here is the jet stream, and here's our trough by tomorrow morning. It's actually going to be pretty much a neutral tilt in general, not really positive or negatively tilted, but as we go later into tomorrow, eventually by the afternoon hours, this will eventually start to amplify and intensify in the southern plains. Strong southwesterly and southerly flow, which will promote a lot of spin in the atmosphere, which should eventually allow for the potential for several tornadoes, and it will also become a more negatively tilted trough, which for those that don't know, negatively tilted troughs are the ones that usually bring a more significant threat of severe weather. So that's what we'll be looking at as we go into tomorrow afternoon, and eventually as we go into Sunday, this storm system will continue to move more to the north and northeast, which will promote the threat for severe weather on Sunday as far north as areas like Virginia, and it will also be occurring across areas in the southeast United States before things start to quiet down again as we go into Monday. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential for the next few days, and we'll begin with tomorrow, which is going to be the biggest risk of any of the next few days. We currently have an enhanced risk for severe weather from western Alabama back into a sliver of East Texas, includes much of Mississippi and as well as Louisiana, and also a slight and marginal threat goes far north and east as areas like Georgia and as well as Tennessee, and just outside of the Dallas-Fort Worth area in North Texas. Now I do want to point out that this could easily be upgraded to a moderate risk in my opinion for tornadoes. I do think that's definitely a possibility, perhaps back over here in eastern Louisiana and as well as central and western parts of Mississippi, and we'll talk more about why here in just a moment. And by the way, yesterday we had a day 3 enhanced risk issued with this particular threat, which is the first time we've had a day 3 enhanced risk out of any event since May 26th of 2024, and this right here was the risk that we had on that day. Now I'm not saying it's going to be the same setup or going to be the same risk by any means, but it at least gives you an idea here that this is a pretty rare situation that we're dealing with for tomorrow. The Storm Prediction Center obviously has some pretty high confidence here that there will be at least some numerous severe weather, and they've already mentioned that a regional severe weather outbreak is likely tomorrow, and then again a few strong tornadoes are very well in play. Now the wind threat for tomorrow is enhanced. We do have a 30% chance of damaging winds within a 25-mile radius across parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, where we are expecting a bit more of a significant wind threat between 60 to 75 miles per hour and scattered to numerous locations. The large hail threat for tomorrow is not very significant. It really will not be a big talking point. Just make sure you're protecting your vehicle. We could end up seeing a few storms there with quarter to maybe even up to golf ball sized hail. Our tornado risk is really going to be a big concern for tomorrow. We have a very favorable environment in my opinion for tornadoes. Right now a 10% hatched region is outlined. That means that there's a 10% chance within a 25-mile radius of both a tornado and even a strong tornado, which a strong tornado is an EF2 plus type tornado. So that's definitely in play for tomorrow across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, but don't let your guard down if you're outside of that area. Don't be, just looking at the yellow area, because that's not the only place that we could see tornadoes tomorrow. We could see tornadoes as far north as Tennessee, as far west as Texas, and as well as far east as areas like Georgia. Now, as we go into Sunday, this risk will continue. We have a very rare, in my opinion, marginal threat for severe weather back over in areas like Ohio and Pennsylvania in the end of December, which really never happens. So this is obviously pretty rare, but really really the big thing here is that we are watching for another potential for severe weather on Sunday, especially across the slight risk, which is going to be from Virginia back into Georgia, and a marginal threat that goes from Florida back up into the Ohio Valley. Now, as a reminder, we are likely going to be live both Saturday and Sunday, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel and click the bell icon so you're notified when we do go live. We will have several storm chasers out there and well over 200 different live cameras anywhere from Texas all the way back through Georgia, so definitely make sure you tune in, and again, make sure you subscribe to the channel. All right, let's talk more about what's going to be happening tomorrow in terms of timing and the tornado threat. I do want to begin by showing you the low-level jet. This is important because once the low-level jet ramps up, that's when this tornado threat is really going to spark off. And so far, from the looks of it, our tornado risk is really going to be centered across the mid to late afternoon and all the way through the evening and even into the overnight hours. This looks to be a long threat tomorrow, where we could end up being live for over 12 hours because of how long this event looks to be. Right now, the low-level jet is expected to really amplify and intensify across the lower Mississippi Valley right around about 3 to 4 o'clock, and after that, that's when this tornado threat is really going to get going. Strong low-level winds in the southwesterly direction will eventually lead to the potential for several tornadoes tomorrow, especially if we end up seeing discrete supercells. Here's the tornado parameter values for tomorrow. So there will be a chance for an isolated tornado or two anytime between about 8 a.m. all the way through about 2 p.m. But I think the greatest concern is going to come later in the afternoon hours. So this is by 12 to 1 o'clock. Notice how the tornado parameter values are increasing here across Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. The yellows and the reds are obviously going to indicate a more, elevated basically tornado threat. Eventually by 3 to 4 o'clock, that's when these values are really starting to peak across areas like Louisiana. And again, I do think a moderate risk for tornadoes is definitely in play tomorrow for Louisiana and as well as Mississippi. Eventually by 5 to 6 o'clock, this tornado threat will continue to move to the east. Lots of spin in the atmosphere, curved photographs, and also veering winds are all going to promote the potential for tornadoes tomorrow. And there's also a very large warm sector. So there's just a lot of reasons why we think there's a potential for a tornado outbreak. Eventually by 9 to 10 o'clock, this tornado threat is moving into Mississippi and Alabama. By this point, it will become a nocturnal tornado threat. And then eventually, as we get closer to the overnight hours, this tornado threat is not going to be done. It is going to continue almost undoubtedly into the overnight hours and into early Sunday morning. And again, there might be a possibility here that we are live from about 2 or 3 o'clock tomorrow all the way through 6 or 7 a.m. I'm not even kidding. I mean, that's kind of the threat that we're looking at right now if everything ends up panning out the way it's currently looking like it'll pan out. Now, in terms of the future radar, beginning with tomorrow morning, storms will begin to fire off across Louisiana and Texas. For the most part, I don't expect a tornado threat out of the initial storms here, but again, maybe a brief tornado being possible in the morning. Eventually, by the afternoon hours, right around lunchtime, that's when things really start to ramp up, especially over here in Louisiana and Mississippi. We'll have a couple areas that we're watching for, first of which a line of storms will attempt to form, potentially some QLCS tornadoes in Louisiana and Mississippi right around and just after lunchtime, and then discrete and semi-discrete cells will be firing off south of that, and these are the ones that could produce the potential for strong and maybe in cases long track tornadoes. Also back to the west, another line of storms will be ongoing, and that will also have the same capability of damaging winds and maybe a couple of tornadoes. By around 2 to 3 o'clock, these storms are moving throughout Mississippi, and then eventually by 4 to 5, these storms are continuing to move to the northeast. We'll be watching the southern area of this line of storms for the potential for discrete supercells that will be capable of producing the potential for tornadoes. And then also back over near the Mississippi River, same thing. We're going to be dealing with another round of storms, and any ones that are semi-discrete or discrete will have the capability of producing a tornado. Eventually by 6 to 7 o'clock, this continues to move eastbound. Another line of storms will be organizing, and then this one right here will be the one that also produces damaging winds and QLCS tornadoes as we go throughout the late evening and eventually into the overnight hours before that eventually moves further to the east into areas like Alabama and as well as Georgia. Now, before we talk more about areas like Alabama, Georgia, and also the East Coast states, I do want to point out on the future radar here that we are going to be talking about, again, several rounds of storms, and this gives you a pretty good indication in Louisiana and Mississippi, for example, where we're going to basically have 3 different rounds of severe storms, and all of them are going to be basically capable of producing discrete, semi-discrete, and linear modes of storms. And so the first round of storms will be capable of a few discrete cells that could end up producing a tornado threat. For example, the HRRR showing this one back over near Jackson, for example, and then also showing the same sort of thing in this line where we could see a little bit of a clearing pattern here, which might end up leading to the potential for a few storms that could become more organized. And then the third line of storms, which this will more than likely be more linear initially, and then eventually more semi-discrete cells could form out in front of that. But but you'll just notice again, we're going to be talking about several rounds of thunderstorms here across the lower Mississippi Valley tomorrow. It's going to be a pretty long day in terms of a lot of storms. Now, in terms of the areas like Mississippi and as well as Alabama, this is what we're talking about during the early to mid-afternoon hours. So again, a elongated line of storms around 1 to 2 o'clock. A few discrete cells firing off near the Gulf Coast. These are the ones that'll have a greater tornado threat. This will be more of a wind concern. In addition to that, there will also be the potential for some embedded tornadoes. By 3 to 4 o'clock, this continues to move eastbound. Again, the HRRR is showing at least one, if not several different discrete and semi-discrete cells that fire off in areas like southern Mississippi. The wind and isolated tornado threat will continue through 5 to 6 o'clock with this line of storms. By 7 to 8 o'clock, this other line of storms will start to move into areas like Mississippi with more damaging winds and perhaps even a couple more tornadoes. And then eventually by 11 to 12 o'clock, this will continue to move eastbound. More of these discrete cells will fire off in front of the line, and if they're able to build enough up into size, they also will be capable of producing a couple of tornadoes. Eventually by the overnight hours, we're not done. This line will continue to move east with damaging winds and a few more tornadoes before eventually moving into areas like Georgia and as well as areas like Florida. The tornado threat as we go into late Saturday night into early Sunday morning, it will continue even through midnight. We're going to have still a lot of wind shear out there and also pretty curved photographs, which will again lead to the potential for tornadoes. I think the tornado threat will start to be lower sometime around sunrise on Sunday morning across Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, but it's going to continue. We still have a lot of wind shear out there even as we go into Sunday, which should promote the potential for a few tornadoes. You'll notice on the future radar here that again, there will be a potential for a line of thunderstorms as we go into the morning hour Sunday. This should leave it as if we're going to have more of a wind threat here across the southeast Sunday morning, and then eventually as we get closer to lunchtime and just after lunchtime, that tornado threat may become a bit more realized as we start to see some more semi-discrete supercells firing off. And then for Sunday across the mid-Atlantic region, we're going to be talking about a tornado threat that'll basically exist all afternoon and evening for the most part. Again, anywhere from basically Virginia and North Carolina back through South Carolina and Georgia. Overall, this tornado threat though will be lower than what we're talking about tomorrow. So overall, just expecting a couple, maybe a few tornadoes. They'll more than likely be more on the brief side of things, but there is a good chance that we'll also be live on Sunday. So again, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below and click the bell icon so you're notified if and when we do go live either tomorrow or as well as Sunday. In terms of the future radar, we'll be dealing with storm activity throughout the morning. Eventually by the afternoon, we'll be watching for some supercells to try to fire off here across areas in the mid-Atlantic region. This will be mostly an afternoon and early evening threat before eventually daylight heating ends, and then mostly the tornado threat will be dying down a little after sunset. So overall, the greatest threat I think for tornadoes here in the mid-Atlantic on Sunday should be from about 12 o'clock until about 8 o'clock. But again, it's a lower threat overall, not nearly as concerning. Now, I know it's a lot of information in one forecast, but again, we will have a live stream more than likely tomorrow. Just an FYI, tomorrow's threat, there's a pretty high ceiling for tomorrow, so there is definitely a chance that we do have a pretty big tornado outbreak. There's still a chance that it does bust a little bit because how many storms will be out there, but definitely a day that we'd want to be taking seriously, especially during this time of the year where there's a lot of people that are not nearly as focused about severe weather since we are at the end of December. So just make sure if you have any friends or family in the track of this severe weather, make sure that they're aware of it. Feel free to share this video with them. And again, if this forecast ends up verifying, we will likely be live almost all of tomorrow and probably tomorrow night. So again, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And also, I just want to say that even though there's a chance for several tornadoes and some of them could be strong or even long tracked, it does not mean all of you are going to see tornadoes. And in fact, the vast majority of us will not see tornadoes tomorrow. So there's no reason to be panicking here. I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of this situation as we are again near the tail end of December, and there's a lot of people that are just not talking about severe weather right now since we are not technically in springtime, which a lot of people refer to springtime as severe weather season, even though the Dixie Alley severe weather season runs from about November all the way through February. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.